Export controls and economic sanctions are growing areas of compliance for universities in the United States. This presentation will provide a basic overview of federal export controls and economic sanction regulations and help you understand how they may impact your work at the university. The goal is to help you identify potential issues and resolve them before a violation occurs. Since penalties for violations can be costly and include both civil and criminal penalties. Export controls and economic sanction regulations have been developed to strengthen U.S. nation securities and protect the domestic economy. There are three primary federal agencies responsible for these regulations: the Department of the State, the Department of Commerce, the Department of the Treasury. Other agencies such as the Department of Energy and the Nuclear Regulatory Commissions also have export regulations. In this presentation, we'll discuss the export control regulations first, then follow up with the economic sanctions regulations. The export controls regulations identify sensitive items and materials, information, technologies, software, and services that cannot be shared with foreign nations without prior government authorization in the form of an export license. The types of things controlled for export include items that have been designed for military use, items that are commercial but have significant military potential. These are known as dual-use items. Items and materials that could be used for weapons of mass destruction, and the technologies needed to develop, produce, or use these controlled items and materials. The items, materials, and their technologies that are controlled for export are identified on lists maintained by the federal agencies. For example, the Department of State identifies items through the International Traffic in Arms Regulations, or ITAR. If an item is listed in the ITAR, you will need a license to export it. The Department of Commerce identifies items through the Commerce Control List, or CCL. Items listed in the CCL may be controlled for export to one country, but not another. You may be thinking that you don't export anything, so perhaps you don't need to know about these regulations. To better understand how they can impact work at a university, it's important to understand the different ways exports can occur. There are two kinds of exports that can occur in a university setting. The first applies to tangible items such as research materials and equipment. An export is taking or sending an item out of the United States in any manner. Whenever an item is mailed or shipped out of the United States, it has been exported. For example, people at universities may send research samples to foreign collaborators, ship equipment out of the country for repair, or in advance of a research project. Each of these shipments is an export and may require an export license. University travelers also export whenever they take things with them on foreign travel. Many travelers bring laptops, cell phones, cameras, research materials, and equipment with them when they travel out of the country. Everything a traveler brings or ships ahead is considered an export, even if it will only be out of the country temporarily. Some of these items may be controlled for export to the traveler's destination and may require an export license. The second kind of export applies to information and technology. Let me first define technology. Technology is the information necessary for the design, development, production, operation, repair, testing, or modification of an item or material. Technology can be in many forms such as software, blueprints, formulas, drawings, photographs, plans, and instructional manuals. Technology is exported by disclosing or transferring it to a foreign person, whether it is in the United States or abroad. The disclosure can be visual or oral. For example, if a foreign person views blueprints, formulas, software code, research results or plans, and export has been made to that person's country of citizenship. If a foreign person is given access to an item and can learn enough about that item to reproduce it, an export of that item's technology has occurred. Similarly, if a foreign person overhears a conversation about technology, an export of that technology has occurred. As noted in the definition, the disclosure of technology is considered an export even if it happens in the United States. It's pretty easy to see how this can happen in a university setting. For example, a deemed export of technology could happen when foreign national students and postdocs are working on research projects, when we share information with foreign colleagues, when foreign visitors are on campus and have access to technology, when we store technology or software codes on a shared drive or other locations without adequate protection. This disclosure is only an export if it is made to a foreign person. So it's important to know what a foreign person is in this context. A foreign person is an entity who is not a U.S. citizen, a permanent resident, sometimes referred to as a green card holder, or a person protected under U.S. statute, such as an asylee. A foreign person also refers to a business or group not incorporated to do business in the U.S. Foreign students in the U.S. on visas and people here on temporary work visas are considered foreign persons. As noted earlier, items and technology may be controlled for export to one country but not to another. So the export of technology is only a violation if the technology being disclosed is controlled for export to the foreign person's country of citizenship. To summarize, export regulations require us to obtain prior government authorization in the form of an export license prior to sending, shipping, or carrying controlled items and materials out of the United States, and disclosing controlled information or technology to foreign persons wherever they are located. Universities attract the attention of the federal regulators because we create and use cutting-edge knowledge and technologies, and we have a culture of sharing information without restrictions. The good news is that the regulations also include important exclusions that allow universities to share most information and technology without restriction. For example, we are not responsible for protecting information that is already in the public domain. If the information or technology you are sharing is already available in books, journals, libraries, or online without restriction, it is not subject to export controls and we do not have to protect it. Another helpful exclusion is for the educational material. Information that's taught in the catalog listed college courses is usually not subject to export controls. An exclusion that's important to universities is the fundamental research exclusion. It says that information that's the product of fundamental research is not controlled for export. This is important, so let's go into a little more detail about fundamental research. Fundamental research is research in science, engineering, or mathematics, the results of which ordinarily are published and shared broadly within the research community, and for which the researchers have not accepted restrictions for proprietary or national security reasons. Information and technology that arises from fundamental research is excluded from export controls and can be shared without restrictions. However, it is not fundamental research if you have accepted publication restrictions or restrictions on who can participate in the project based on country of citizenship. If either of these restrictions apply, your research is subject to export controls. This means that the export controls applies to the information generated from the research, and you may need to get an export license before foreign persons can work on a project where they will receive controlled technology. Notice that these helpful exclusions apply only to shared information and technology, not to the export of tangible items. However, the regulations also include some license exceptions that can apply to the export of items and materials. For example, License Exception TMP allows you to bring university-owned items and equipment out of the country as long as they are necessary for your work, remain under your control, and are returned to the U.S. within 1 year. Every export should be evaluated in advance. If the export is not excluded as a public domain, educational information, or the product fundamental research, and there isn't a license exception that applies, you will probably need to get an export license, even for a deemed export of information or technology. Contact the Export Control Office in sponsored projects for assistance. Please note that this is just a general overview of the export control regulations. They are complicated and change frequently. If you have items, material, software, or technology that you need to share with a foreign national, it is highly recommended to contact the University Export Controls Office well in advance of any export. Export license can take several months to process. Now let's go over the economic sanction regulations and see how they apply to universities. The economic sanction regulations identify entities that are known or suspected to be risks to the U.S. national security. The entities could be countries, regimes, institutions and businesses, or individual people. These entities are identified on various federal prohibited or restricted parties lists. U.S. persons cannot have transactions with or provide services to these entities without prior government authorization. Some of the ways economic sanctions can impact university activities are by limiting who you can hire or pay to participate in a project, what company you can purchase equipment and supplies from, who you can enter into a contract or subcontract with, or who you can receive funding from, who you can share information with, since sharing information is considered providing a service, and whether or not you can accept an invitation to attend or present at a foreign conference. The university has an export controls compliance program to help prevent export controls and economic sanction violations. However, all university faculty, staff, and students are responsible for awareness of and compliance with these regulations. To prevent violations, here are some examples of when you should contact the Export Control Officer in sponsored projects. When you're unsure if an item, material, technology, or software you're working with or creating is controlled, it's not always easy to know if something is controlled for export, so it's best to check if you suspect it may be. If your project requires access to or use of a defense article or technology, before shipping items or technology out of the U.S., an item may be controlled for export to one country and not to another. If there is a potential for deemed export, such as when you're working on proprietary or developmental research projects, when you're considering an agreement or contract with a foreign entity, the Export Control Officer can determine whether or not the entity is on any restricted party lists. If you're considering traveling to a sanctioned country, the Export Control Officer can help you understand what you can and cannot do in a sanctioned country. Violation of exports and economic sanction regulations can include both administrative and criminal penalties. For example, administrative fines can be $250,000 per violation, and criminal penalties can include jail time. Therefore, it is important for all university faculty, staff, and students to be aware of the regulations and identify potential compliance issues before they occur.